So the first book that I wanted to talk about here is Amazon Interview Secrets by Martha Gage. And if you take a closer look, it's actually how to respond to 101 Amazon Leadership Principles interview questions. And it's only 60 pages long, it's 1 hour long. And while the title of this book is quite appealing, the quality of the answers presented in this book is at best suitable for entry-level roles. The main reasons for saying this is because many of the answers are too general for my taste. Also, I found that many of the answers are pitching as much as 3 leadership principles at once, which I find very unlikely to be a successful. I find it very difficult to believe that you will be able to answer questions with 3 leadership principles and your interviewer to spot each and every one of them. So I'd rather focus on 1 or 2, which would be better. Another thing that spot my attention here would be talking about team experience and in one specific scenario about a coworker that performed poorly some task. And this is the type of behavior that you want to avoid during a job interview, because that is the interview is about yourself rather than someone else. So the language used in some of those answers is definitely not something that I'm a very big fan of. Now, on the good side of this is, for example, a very interesting quote that I've seen here: "Talent wins games, but teamwork wins championships." So this is something definitely that you may want to note. It's a great quote. Another interesting point about this small book is a question: what is the one thing that you would change about Amazon? And this is a very tricky one if you think about it for a second. And the other thing that I liked about this is the response to what is peculiar about you, and the answer being that I'm the type of person who's looking forward to Mondays. Now, maybe as a closing note, there are also questions that are mentioned multiple times, so I would very much argue that it's not 101 questions in total, but the answers tend to be different in each circumstance. So there are at least 101 answers, but again, this wouldn't be my favorite of the four books. All right, now the second book that I wanted to talk about here is The STAR interview by Misha Yurchenko. And this is actually the first of the 2 books that I'm going to review by Misha Yurchenko here. So as the title implies, this book is dedicated to the STAR interview, and as you can see, it's a pretty sizable book. I think it's almost 200 pages long. My first question was, why would anyone spend 200 pages, that much time reading about the STAR method? And to be honest with you, I couldn't find a good enough reason to invest my time into reading it for the sole purpose to understand the STAR method, which is quite obvious, I would think. But given the fact that the author of this book used to recruit people into Amazon, there are some super interesting insights throughout the book. So I've made a compilation with some things that caught my attention here, both with the ones that I agree, but also with the ones that I disagree here. So the main pitch of this book is that the STAR answers, and to make a good impression in an interview, you must be really good at storytelling. This is the one main idea in this book. And then to jump to a quick tip here, what Misha actually noticed, and he said it's researched, is scientifically backed stuff, is if you schedule your on-site interview after lunch, then your chances to get a job are higher, because interviewers tend to be more permissive after their lunch as opposed to before the lunch. Anyhow, I just thought I'd say this. Something I do not disagree with, I relatively disagree with him, is that the STAR answers should be between 3 and 5 minutes long. In my opinion, for a senior role at least, you should keep it under 2 minutes at all costs, because the goal is to start a conversation after all. So no matter how good you are at storytelling, you must get into a conversation, especially during the loop. And I believe that the more concise, the more decisive your answers are, the better your shot at improving your chances here. Also, he advises people during on-site interviews to make eye contact with the interviewer every 3 seconds or so, which I believe it's a very good idea. Yes, and another very interesting tip here is when talking about failures or about drama, such as when you lost $1 million to your company, to keep eye contact at all times with the interviewer. So put it straight in their face, like, hey, I lost 1 million for my company. This is what the failure. It's very important, because if you look somewhere else during the time you talk about the failure, it will very much you'll very much risk of putting yourself in a different situation here. Yeah, another great tip here is to mirror the body language of the interviewer during the on-site interview, of course, because people tend to relate much better with other people to whom they can identify with, self-identify with. So definitely something to keep in mind. The next interesting thing that I spotted in this book is that the rule of threes. In other words, when talking, for instance, while answering the question why Amazon, you should give 3 reasons for this. And I'll touch upon this rule in the 4th book that I'm going to review today. So just keep in mind, it's a good idea. It's a better idea to give 3 reasons than 2 reasons. Now, this being said, if you don't have 3 reasons, then just keep it to 2 reasons. Then something I disagree with Misha here is he advises for management positions to use the word we, and he specifically does that on page 57, if you'll ever get time to read this, which I definitely disagree, and I believe that Amazon has made it quite clear that the interview is about yourself, and I believe this is something really, really important that you would want to keep in mind at all costs, that it's I did this, right? What else do we have here? Yes, there are also while the examples in the book are of much better quality than the first book that I reviewed, there is a little bit of tendency of ending his stories on a sad note, and I believe you should keep in mind that you should always end your story on a positive, on a high, if you could. Yes, honestly, I found the book was too detailed, and many of the ideas were becoming redundant. And to motivate this, maybe it's a matter of taste, you would say. But to motivate this, I know that even Amazon has changed their tune to even call the STAR method SAR. So even eliminate the T from there, simply because there are so many people that are well-intentioned, but simply spend too much time on the situation and task, and make the story so boring that the interviewer loses interest. So that's why your interest is to keep your story short and concise. So yeah, this was my overall thing. And yes, another very interesting tip he gives is when practicing. Of course, the best type of practice, other than role play with someone, is to practice in the mirror. And when is it the best time to practice? And he makes a very interesting point here. It's best to practice during difficult hours, that is 5 o'clock in the morning or after midnight, simply because this way you build some sort of muscle, you build some resilience to these types of events. So yes, definitely I find this an interesting idea. And also worthwhile reading are the 23 examples at the end of the book. So overall, it's a good book. It has many tips and tricks. So yes, I would say it's an interesting exploration, so long as you don't read each and every page of it. So you just go through it faster than usual. So the third book that I wanted to talk about here is Cracking the Amazon Interview by the same Misha Yurchenko. And this book is a lot more concise, as you can see here. And it actually gives more insight as to as to how it works at Amazon. So just the table of contents, it's introduction, then the flywheel, then understanding the job levels, supercharging your resume, direct applications versus recruiters, interview process, leadership principles, the STAR method, questions for the interviewer, the philosophy of impact, and so on. So it's when compared to the STAR method, it has a lot more hands-on approach with these things, so the advice is a lot more straightforward here. Now, this being said, this book doesn't touch upon the interview prep specifically, but it has a good amount of insight when it comes to this. Some interesting notes here. For example, on page 29, he said that PowerPoints are banned from Amazon, which is something that Jeff Bezos himself said a while ago. But in fact, this is not at all true. And I'm getting more and more reports of people either receiving PowerPoint presentations as preparation material for their interviews. And I've even heard of someone being asked to submit their writing assignment either as a document in Word, either as a PowerPoint presentation. So the PowerPoint presentations are probably banned, but not that banned, not that big of a deal at Amazon. So also interesting to know that after the loop, the whole hiring team will meet in one room and decide whether you're a good hire or not. And the longer it takes for them to decide, the lesser your chances to actually get the job. This is at least the advice. Also, positions above level 5 get reference checked by the hiring manager, by the HR manager. So this means senior roles, pretty much all of them. What else is interesting? Yes, I would definitely recommend you to buy the digital version of this book, because the print one is missing the links, so you definitely want to do this. Both this and the previous book have some additional materials. There are links in the opening of the books. Yes, and something that Misha tries here to give percentage of people, to give a ballpark figure of how many people pass through various stages, and he says that 20% of the people who made it on the loop actually get the job. That could be the case, but something that I really disagree with him is when he says that 50% of the people, 1 in 2 people who make it to the second phone interview get onto the loop. My experience is very different, so I would rather go with the 20% again. So yeah, but at least maybe this was the case at some point in time, or this was the case in a specific geography. And finally, something else that I found dubious, and something that my experience can confirm is not the case, is that the people who spend the most time preparing for the interview are the ones that get the job. I honestly disagree with this. I know very much people who invested a lot of resources, a lot of money, including to build a great CV, to prepare the first phone interview, and really to fake the CV, to really build a great CV by someone who does this full time, and to prepare those leadership principles again by, for example, for employing some fake answers. But the Amazon process is designed in such a way that it's so structured that it's very hard to hack. So this is why I believe it's not about the amount of time you invest. And I'll give you also some estimations in my last book, in my 4th book review. But it's very much how you go about it and how serious you are about really doing the best during the interview, given the resources that you have. And this I found the main differentiator between candidates that tend to do well, and the not so successful candidates. But anyway, in the 4th book that I'm going to review, I'll give you more interesting information about this. And the 4th book that I wanted to talk about here is the product manager interview. So it's by Dominic Black. And actually, I believe it's the best content of the 4 that I'm reviewing for today. And if you just forget for a moment the product manager role, the book contains some very interesting information when it comes to preparing for the Amazon interview, but preparing for real about it. So it does have a ton of examples of highest quality I've seen in a while. And let's just touch upon the interesting parts here. So first of all, if you ever get to buy this book, you should know it's 140 pages, out of which the first 50 are useless, the last 30 are useless again. So from 50 to 100, it's what really matters about this book, and the author is upfront about this. Now, what is interesting about this? The framework to prepare is the following. So when Amazon reviews your answer, there are 3 things they are after. The first one is fit, that is if coworkers are able to tolerate you on the job. The second one is motivation, in other words, if you will love the job. And the third one is strengths, whether you have what it takes to actually get the job done. So think about it for a second, and I believe you could easily think about from this perspective easily for pretty much any answer that you give to any question. This is something very interesting. Also, they recommend only pitch 1 or maximum 2 per answer, so only focus on either fit, either motivation, either strength when speaking your answer. Also interesting here to note is they provide a framework to ask questions for the interviewer. The framework is called the 5 W's and 1 H. In other words, it's who, what, when, why, where, and how. And I'll try to link some examples in the comments section of the video. They also give some rather specific frameworks when answering questions for a product manager, but I found it not too interesting, at least for the purpose of this discussion, for this review, because I found that those frameworks were too static to be interesting enough to be looked at. And something you should know is that the author doesn't take the answer in STAR format, but he'd rather use the SGAR. So instead of T from task, it goes from goals. I'm not sure that's the best thing, given the fact that I'm very much an adept of eliminating the G and the T. In other words, going with the STAR, because the main goal is to communicate efficiently as much as we can. But anyway, it's good. Another interesting and very important thing here is they give a list of interesting strengths and weaknesses, and this is something that took me quite a while to build myself, and their list is actually much broader than mine, so I also try to link some examples in the video description. The rule of 3s is something they emphasize when answering questions about strengths. So in other words, what's your strength? You could emphasize three strengths, such as analytical, leadership, and see things through to the end. So the rule of 3s is something that actually exists, to my surprise. I was suspecting it was something as a framework, but I wasn't sure. So in a previous book I talked about how to use the rule of 3s for answering why Amazon, so this still exists for other contexts as well. There is a little mistake in the book, and page 55 talks about and the various failures, if any, that can be attributed to you. You should take it this way: if you don't have a failure, you should not present yourself to an Amazon interview. So in other words, don't even think about not having an answer to behavioral questions, because the behavioral questions are designed so anyone could have an answer for them. Something that I found interesting is also they're missing questions about dealing with data or ambiguity, because they say in the book that the product manager is actually the CEO of the product, and any CEO has to work with data and deal with ambiguity. So I found this could have been maybe touched upon better. All the examples are strong, relevant, so I definitely recommend you to take them seriously. Yes, and the other very interesting and important part of the preparation process is that they split the types of behavioral questions that exist into five types. The first is about leading and managing others. The second is about difficult situations. The third is about past failures and mistakes. The fourth is about successes in your career. And the fifth is working with others. Why is this important? I'll let you know in a moment. So the way they recommend to prepare is to prepare 3 stories for each of these 5 categories. So this would be 15 in total, and they do say you should actually talk about each of the 14 leadership principles throughout them, or if you haven't, you should reconsider them and cover all the 14 leadership principles. Why is this important? Well, notice here they didn't start with the leadership principles at first, which if you're Googling Amazon interview or if you're watching through my content, it's always with the leadership principles. But this approach is very interesting because you see the traditional way you do things is you prepare 2 examples for each of the leadership principles, for each of the 14. The challenge there is you could easily end up with 28 positive stories. Like you think about the behavior for each of the leadership principles, how you did your best, you focus on your strengths, in other words. The trouble with this approach is this: you'll never touch upon failures or on things you regret on when you apologize to someone. So if you take, on the other hand, this approach with these 5 categories, right, you inevitably go through leading and managing others, difficult situations, past failures and mistakes, success in your career, and working with others. So the chances that you'll cover a broader set of questions increases if you go this way. So it's very, very, very interesting as an approach, and I definitely recommend it. And by the way, I also have the list of the 35 most commonly asked questions. That approach would also ensure that you cover even a broader area and you'll be even more targeted to what they're really asking in Amazon interviews. With respect to what you should ask the interviewer, they have a good list of questions to ask, and they have a list of questions to avoid asking, such as questions about money or what's the vacation like and all that stuff. It's common sense, but it's good to know, it's good to emphasize, it's good to have a confirmation with these things. Now when it comes to the time it takes to prepare for the interviews, now it gets interesting. They recommend to spend between 25 and 30 hours for the phone interview in preparation, and half of that time to be spent for the behavioral part of the interview. So 25 to 30 hours, half of it for behavioral questions. I believe this is strong advice. And now it gets even more interesting when preparing for the on-site, where they recommend between 60 and 70 hours to prepare, out of which almost half should be for the behavioral part. So you see, these people recommend to spend 1 week, 2 weeks to prepare for the job interview, and they know from experience. And by the way, I would also highly recommend to invest a lot of time into this, so long as you know what you're doing, right? So long as you have the right approach. Something that I disagree with them, and I found it quite interesting that they said, they emphasized it here, is men will want to wear a suit and tie. Like even Amazon on their YouTube channel says to dress casually, and the dress code is casual, and they have many videos about this. But they recommend, at least for the product manager role, to wear a suit and tie. Same for the ladies, to be very formal. And last but not least, very good advice is, at least as a product manager or for any senior role, you must own the room during the on-site interview. You must show confidence. If you don't show confidence, if you don't look like you own the room, you will inevitably fail. And The other thing very interesting here is do not go into an interview expecting something. You don't really need Amazon as much as Amazon needs you, at least in the case of a product manager role. So again, if you're applying for an SDE level 1, you will not be likely in a good spot if you try to own the room, right? But still, showing confidence is a good idea. So this being said, what do you think? Do you have any other recommendations of content that I should take a look at? I'd be curious to know what your thoughts in the comment sections of this video, and as always, thank you very much for watching.